Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, Australia's deficit could reach $200 billion, but as JobKeeper is pared back, leading economists are urging the government to keep spending. Officials dodge responsibility for the breaches in Victoria's hotel quarantine. Has the inquiry into the scheme let them off the hook? And the New York Times reports that Donald Trump paid $1,500 in tax over the last 18 years. But with weeks to go until the election, is this likely to change anything? Joining me on the panel, a range of people who clearly pay too much tax. Presenter of Saturday Extra radio show on the ABC, Geraldine Duke. Hello, Geraldine. Thank you for coming in. You were up at 4:15.
Yes.
On RN this morning. Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Senior reporter at HuffPost, Nick Visser. Good day, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
In Townsville tonight, former Liberal Nationals MP Ewan Jones. Good day, Ewan.
G'day, Ellen. How are you?
Very good. And in Melbourne, cross-cultural consultant Tasneem Chopra. Always lovely to see you, Tasneem.
Hi, Ellen.
And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum and on Facebook. The federal budget is bent, but not yet broken. That's the view of one of the nation's leading financial forecasters, Deloitte Access Economics. So what does that mean? Well, they're tipping the deficit to rise to an incredible $200 billion over the next few years, and yet their message to the government is clear. Now is not the time to stop spending.
The emergency band-aids are starting to come off a little earlier than we'd have liked. So both families and businesses are set for a big cash crunch between now and end of March 2021 as emergency responses run out.
The timing of this report couldn't be more targeted, coming just as the government begins to pare back the JobKeeper scheme that has been keeping millions in work. From today, those working full-time will have their payments cut to $1,200 a fortnight from $1,500, and those working less than 20 hours will receive $750 a fortnight.
We've got to get Australians back to work. Indeed, there are many people who are saying that they're crying out for labour. They're crying out for workers to come to regional areas, and we're just about to get a bumper harvest.
But the Australian Council of Trade Unions says cutting back the payments now is a mistake and, in their view, unnecessarily cruel.
The reality is that we know there's one job for every 12 people looking for it. And the economy is still deeply, deeply wounded by the pandemic. We're in a recession, and the government themselves, the Reserve Bank, the majority of economists all say that unemployment's continuing to rise.
Tasneem, I'll start with you. You and Ewan are on JobKeeper, and Nick's partner is on JobKeeper, so we have a sample group. What are your thoughts about the payment dropping down? Does that fill you with anxiety, or has it been enough for this time?
Well, it fills me with more anxiety when I know the experts are anxious about it too. But I'm also trying to pair the reality of there being no set date of confidence with which the government can predict the economy will open and resume, but they do have a set date for diminishing the JobKeeper. And so that doesn't really bode well for consumer confidence, knowing that you're willing to cut the payments to the community, but you're not willing to tell us if the economy is going to be getting back on its feet. So, yeah, there's a dissonance there that makes me very unsettled and wondering what the game plan is.
So how's work at the moment?
Yeah, it's up and down. It's up and down. I've managed to find a small part-time role, which is great. And until my central business really picks up, JobKeeper has been an essential.
Ewan, what about you? Are you still on JobKeeper?
Yes, I am, Ellen. I find that I back the government with this because I think that there are obviously holes in it where people who were working 1 day a week were picking up $750 a week for it. So I think it's good that they pare those things back. I think that Victoria is still going to be a major problem for the government. But up here in North Queensland and Darwin and places like that where I speak to people, it's pretty much business as usual, and I think it's a lot of people are probably preferring that we do start to come off JobKeeper and do start to poke our way forward. I do agree with Chris Richards that the first quarter next year is going to be very interesting, and it's going to be quite tight. But up here, we've got farmers trying to get people to come onto their farms and take fruit off, and my son's going to go fruit picking and all sorts of things because the money's good at the moment.
Can I ask you perhaps a little bit of a rude question? If things are picking up, why are you still on JobKeeper? Why does your business still need JobKeeper?
Things are picking up, but my role, I got brought back, my role is entirely prospective. For the company for whom I work, Pickering's Autos, my role is 100% prospective. So when JobKeeper came in, it gave them the opportunity to get me back understanding that the funnel would need to come in, that we'd have to start getting more opportunities to come into the business, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the track, and have to start building those relationships. But the feature of the government, or the feature of the business, was trying to make sure that the door stayed open, because we really didn't know what was going on. So at the moment, it's being offered, and we'll take it, because at the moment, I don't generate an income. The income I'll generate is down the track.
And are you optimistic? Presumably you're not going to pick fruit with your son, as the Deputy Prime Minister suggests. I suggest that you and I are a little bit too old for that, sir. But are you therefore confident that as the payment begins to dwindle towards ending in March, that you'll be right, that the business will come back?
I think that we will make a decision as a business. I'm not privy to the discussions that my managers and the owners of the business have. But I see in North Queensland that there is a genuine way forward. There's a genuine thing, thinking that we are on top of this, and that this is just another step along the way.
Geraldine, it's interesting. This is all in the context of the budget. So you've got a third of businesses being propped up by JobKeeper, and you've got Deloitte Access Economics saying, for heaven's sakes, keep enough support in to keep sufficient spending occurring. So they're talking about personal tax cuts, and we've got this point where the superannuation withdrawals are going to dry up, and the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker dial back, and the mortgage deferrals and the rent deferrals are going to end. Is the government showing enough imagination about a spending program to get Australia through this?
Well, look, I can't see it, but I do. It's so confusing. I mean, that was terribly interesting hearing about the North Queensland sentiments, that they think they will be able to be okay. And, those employment figures that came through, last week, showing actually they weren't too bad. And everybody said, oh, hang on, what do we make of that? And I don't know. I mean, you hear the Future Fund, who's got 75% of its investments now held in cash, which suggests that they are worried about next year. That's, super cautious, don't take the risks. And yet you have mixed evidence coming. Solomon Lew, I think, Jerry Harvey's got the best figures for 60 years. Solomon Lew in retail is sort of saying he's also doing quite well. Now, what is going on?
Yes.
It's hard to read. I can't believe next year is going to be fun. And this is where I must say I'm of the view of many that this is the time to start thinking about renewables, jobs, repositioning, people saying, let's not waste a good crisis. Let's really think about how we usefully spend money to go into new areas, and people might be rattled enough to move.
So you'd be looking for sort of big projects?
I would.
As well as these sorts of tax cuts, and let's prop up regional airlines, let's make sure that the major airlines are still going to be flying at the end of this, and all those sorts of housekeeping bits of business that are being done that are very, very necessary, but you'd be looking for something beyond that.
I would. I mean, in other words, there's a form of Keynesianism underway at the moment, and that's the argument. People like Paul Keating were making this argument last week to the Reserve Bank. Keep buying those government bonds. Don't ask me to explain it, because I can't.
We tried last week.
I've read it 3 times. But, so it's sort of Keynesianism, but in one way, but I think the bigger Keynesianism notion of saying, right, this is the time when you actually need the sort of paraphernalia of government in conjunction with the private sector to truly think big. I mean, that appeals to me.
Nick, you have this very interesting job where you're actually reporting in the United States, but you've time shifted and you do it from Sydney.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can at once look at where you live and where you work. Do us a bit of a comparison on the unemployment stimulus here in the US.
I think, like you mentioned, my partner has been on JobKeeper since the program rolled out, and it's been incredibly helpful here. And so that's my biggest touchstone. And back in the US, I me and many people that earned under a certain threshold were sent a $1,200 check, and that for a couple weeks was helpful. For some people, it just went into their bank accounts. For other people, it went to pay rent, healthcare bills, credit card bills, and then that was it. The U.S. had a pretty long-lasting supplement to unemployment claims, so anybody that lost their job for a few months until July had an extra $600 US in their bank account a week, and that was deeply helpful. But then that program ended. President Trump extended it a little bit, as did Congress in the US, and that was helpful. But a lot of people, maybe a few weeks or a month or two in advance of Australia, are wondering what's going to happen next. They're in limbo, they're in stasis, and they're wondering in 2021, are they going to be able to pay their rent? Are they going to be able to pay their healthcare bills? And they aren't sure. Mortgage deferrals are happening over there, and there's an eviction moratorium around the country until the end of the year. But then after that, again, people aren't sure, and it will be the middle of winter for a large part of the US.
I see. And just before we move on, so healthcare is often a perk of a job in the United States. Tell me the story. What are your friends paying for a COVID test if they don't have healthcare?
I had a coworker that had to get a COVID test that was negative, and she thought it was going to be covered completely. I think she called her insurance company in advance and was guaranteed that it was going to be covered. As it is here, you can go and not have to expect a bill in the mail. But then a couple weeks after she went to get that test, she opened her mail and there was a bill for $500, and it was completely unexpected. And I have many friends here that have had multiple COVID tests, and that is not feasible if you live in the US and you're hoping to get one every time you have an itchy throat or a running nose because you can't afford to pay it. I think that is just one anecdotal moment, and she's working with her insurance company to get it sorted out. But after that, yeah, it just adds a level of uncertainty to know that you could be hit with an unsuspected bill, which would deter a lot of people.
Yes, the implications for public health don't bear thinking about. Well, coming up, Donald Trump's financial history laid bare by the New York Times. They figure the president paid little more than $1,500 in tax over the past 18 years.
Totally fake news. No, actually, I paid tax, and you'll see that as soon as my tax returns.
Victoria has recorded its lowest number of new coronavirus cases in almost 4 months, just 5 new infections in the last 24 hours.
We are so close. We are so close to being able to take a really big step toward that COVID normal. If we continue to make smart choices, then we will see this thing off. If, however, any of us, and it can be very small numbers, if we start doing things that we know deep down are not the right thing to do, then we can put at risk everything that we've built, everything that Victorians have given.
Speaking of smart choices, many Victorians are still searching for answers to how serious the breaches in the state's hotel quarantine program occurred. Today, we heard from the council assisting the inquiry into the program. She said it's possible that no one made the final decision to use private security guards in the hotels.
There wasn't any specific decision. There wasn't any specific decision by an individual or by a group. It was a creeping assumption that became the reality.
Last week, the Premier became the latest in a long list of officials to claim he had no idea who authorised the use of private contractors. But he did say he considered Health Minister Jenny Mikakos ultimately accountable for it. So it's perhaps no surprise that over the weekend, the Health Minister resigned.
I am deeply sorry for the situation that Victorians find themselves in. In good conscience, I do not believe that my actions led to them.
Can I start with you again, Tasneem? You have been a supporter of Dan Andrews through all of this, but in the inquiry into how this virus got out of hotel quarantine, we've had 13 senior officials, including 5 ministers, one of them the Premier, say no idea at all how private security guards were chosen to guard all this. Does that sound competent to you?
It doesn't sound like a satisfactory response. It's not the response that you want to hear. But I sense that the minister's resignation since then is certainly going to keep a number of people I don't know if happy is the right word, but feeling a sense that, okay, this might finally have gotten somewhere. Maybe there's someone who's taken some responsibility for it.
But she says she wasn't to blame. How does this help?
She says she wasn't to blame, but the actions indicate that a resolution of some sort has been reached, and I think the results of the inquiry that are coming up in a few weeks will again perhaps toss another light on this. And for me, though, it's baffling that the agency responsible for both retaining and deploying the actual security guards isn't really being brought to bear. I mean, I did some participatory work as a volunteer